Good morning, everybody, after the initial break, and hopefully everybody has had a chance to wake up by now. Quite a few years ago, we visited a friend, and his house was literally next to the railway. And overnight, us guests, we woke up every time a train passed by. In the morning, we discussed this with the host, and he said, "I heard no trains. I slept really well." And people get used to things. And the same thing happens with the alerts from the monitoring system. So today I'd like to talk about three different areas that are very closely related. First, what alert noise and fatigue is and what do we know about it? And also the technical means that are available in and around Zabbix to maybe deal with the alert noise a little bit. And eventually, what are the cultural things that affect the alert noise and that result from it? Now, who here is working in a company without any alert noise? Any hands up? There's one hand, there's two hands. I don't know whether those are genuine answers or that's just making fun of us. But yeah, it's at the maximum 2 people out of this whole audience who are working in a company without alert noise. And we know that alert noise, it's bad, MK. And it's bad, but is it really bad? How do we know it? It seems obvious. But so many things over the years have turned out to be wrong that seem obvious to people, many of those. And actually, all the obvious things do need proof. So, by the way, full moon actually does not affect people in any meaningful way. That's one of the things that seems obvious to many people still nowadays, which actually is not true. Now, talking about the alarms and the alert noise, there are studies. For example, this one concluded that the false alarms, they distract the attention from the actual problems. In yet another study, they figured out that the person is not able to react to problems in a proper manner due to the alert noise. And the alarm fatigue, which results from alert noise, results to the alarms being increasingly ignored. What is even more important is that non-actionable alarms, they increase the alert fatigue even more. They result in alerts being ignored even more and more. Now, all these studies over the years, they're not from IT actually. This is all from healthcare industry. And it seems like the healthcare industry might be something that we can learn from, but actually in that industry, they are still figuring this out. And there is this one case where a patient went into a hospital and they got overdose. Not just a little bit of overdose, actually 38 times more of the dose for the medicine they were supposed to get. Why? They had all these checks in the flow where they had alerts that this dose doesn't seem to be okay, somebody should check this. But all those alerts, there were too many of them. So all the people in the hospital, they got used to them and they started ignoring them. By the way, that person survived, so it's all good in this story. But it shows the impact that alert noise can have, a very specific and strong impact. And yet another study, which was looking at the intensive care units in the hospital in California, they found out that in 1 month study period, there were more than 2.5 million unique alarms. I think we might agree that it's not possible to investigate all these alarms, not even to actually look at that number of alarms in a month. Now, we might think that we could learn from the healthcare industry a little bit because they have been doing this perhaps a little bit longer than IT industry, and healthcare industry is looking up to yet another industry, the air travel industry, the airplane industry. So a study called Lessons from the Glass Cockpit is looking at how the airplane pilots are ignoring the alerts or not ignoring the alerts, and what can be done to actually make these alerts matter. The IT industry is paying attention to alert noise as well, and cybersecurity is one area where this is maybe more pronounced than elsewhere, because in security, even one missed alert can turn out to be very critical. So Craig Robinson stated that a well-trained professional does not enjoy wasting time on chasing ghosts. But probably that's true for all of us, no matter what industry we work in. And one thing that can maybe be a bit easier to sell is that alert noise can be very expensive. And that is true for any company. Alert fatigue can result, as we just established, to alerts being ignored, to excessive downtime. There can be overtime costs. If we have sporadic alerts, then people will end up working overtime, and that is a very direct expense for the company. And that will definitely lead to burnout. If you notice the missing closing parentheses, that's on purpose, just to see who's looking at the slides. And that also means that you probably will be subject to that burnout. The people who pay attention to detail, they are more likely to be the first ones to burn out from the alert noise. The technical means in Zabbix that we have available to reduce the alert noise, probably the most simple one that everybody here is using, if only from the default templates, the trigger functions. Instead of alerting on a single value that's above or below the threshold, we look at the minimum or maximum over some period of time. We can also use trigger functions to hack around some conditions. In this example, in the graph, we can see that there are gaps. These gaps can come from some technical problem that we are unable to fix at this time. Now, instead of alerting on that each single value that happens to bring up the average, we can hack the trigger expression, add another condition, and just alert then when we have multiple values in the evaluation time period. It's a hack, but it's a very valid solution to reduce the alert noise. Trigger predictive functions. How many people here are using predictive functions in Zabbix? Quite a few, I would say a couple of dozen in the room. And trigger predictive functions, they are really great. They're very powerful, and probably they are used in teams where most of the team members have decent technical knowledge of the monitoring solution. Because they can be a bit tricky to implement correctly, and they can be a bit tricky to explain why the trigger fired or it didn't fire at some point. Another very basic feature in Zabbix that, again, everybody is likely using, trigger dependencies. If you have an application that depends on a particular server running, we don't want to have alert on both if the server goes down. There are many scenarios where trigger dependencies are used, and in some cases, there are even extra engines implemented outside of Zabbix that manage these dependencies in more complex environments. Maybe not as obvious, but this is more of a cultural thing and more of an attention to detail thing, validating your input. In this example, we have the output from low-level discovery, and it has discovered 5 entities. So there were 5 items, 5 triggers, 5 alerts. But if we take a closer look, then there was an error. SH4 cannot allocate memory. And each word out of this error message resulted in 1 unnecessary alert. And this is not something that can be always predicted in advance, what failure modes we will have. But whenever we see failures, we just improve, we do the continuous improvement approach, and we add validation in these cases as well. In clustered environments, and this is an approach which in my experience is not that obvious to all of the Zabbix users, it's a very good idea to have an aggregate host for the cluster, which is measuring the cluster metrics and then doing the cluster level alerting as well. No matter whether it's a 2 or 100 node cluster, having alert about a specific problem come from each individual node, that's not really helping to reduce the alert noise. Another solution, and this, by the way, seems to be something that Zabbix is aware of as well, talking about the event management engine inside of Zabbix that might be coming in future versions. Nowadays, especially when there are complex rules and additional external sources, there are people who are adding additional alert manager, which is then utilizing those external sources and only sending a smaller number of alerts to the alert recipients. These are just some of the technical means that are available in Zabbix, and probably many are familiar with to the people in this room. If there are some methods that you find in particular great that I have not mentioned, I'd be very happy to find out about those. But now, talking about the less technical things that are related to alert noise. Dwight Eisenhower, who was the president of the USA a few years ago, said that he has 2 kinds of problems, the urgent and the important. And the urgent are not important, and the important are never urgent. Now, this quote, which is attributed to him, led to the creation of so-called Eisenhower matrix, which is, again, probably very famous. And this is something that we can try to apply to the alerts that are coming out of Zabbix. I've populated this with some examples, and for the urgent and important, it's probably things that affect our customers. It's probably things that need immediate action and that we can actually take some specific steps to resolve. The less urgent things are probably those that can wait for the next morning or maybe next week, but they still have to be resolved. Capacity planning, it's a good thing that's important, but not really urgent in most cases. And we might have alerts about problems that will go bad at some point in the future. In this case, it's a good idea to just disable those alerts and do periodic reviews. For example, if a certificate is expiring at some point in the future and it needs some manual work on it, we want to have some kind of alert, but we don't want to go that to the on-call person. We want to look at that at weekly reviews. I have added here some other examples, but this will depend and this will be different from team to team. So maybe a good approach is to take a blank matrix like this and create a workshop for your team and have them populate it and see how they splice up all these alerts that your team is getting. Talking about the alerts, the first thing that in many teams is going on is that everybody says all our problems or all our alerts are important. They all are urgent. That's why we are alerting. But on a closer look, it turns out that's not the case. And it's a really good approach to slice and dice these alerts. Figure out which ones you can fix now, which ones can wait for later. And you cannot fix everything right away. So we just start small, continuous improvement, and we get something that's actually manageable out of the alerting solution. Regarding the cultural approaches, it's really a good approach to pay attention and make sure that my work does not cause more alerts for my team. And that in Zabbix very often can be achieved by setting the maintenance. So at that point, we still gather the data, or we might opt not to gather the data, but we are not sending out the alerts. There might be sometimes thinking that, well, I'll just do a little bit of work and it will probably not alert, and usually it will. So a strict rule to always set maintenance and to help the teammates not to get those extra alerts. That's a good approach. We can also try to live by the mantra of fix for good. Instead of going in and postponing the problem, we always try to resolve the root cause. So in this very simplified example, we have free disk space graph, and we can see that at some point it started going down, and then it goes back up. But then it continues this, which might indicate that there was just some manual cleanup going on and not really addressing the root cause. Now, referencing a classic movie, Speed, where there's a bus going, if it slows down, it blows up. We might think that Keanu goes, well, I don't see any problem. There's like, road is empty. We can drive like this. And Sandra goes like, man, it probably will be a problem in the future. Think ahead. Solve the problem. Solve the root cause. Another approach is changing how we monitor and what we alert on. Instead of low-level technical detail, all the metrics that we have on disks, CPUs, and everything else, we can go up, and again, this is something that Zabbix is obviously thinking of quite a bit, with the so-called functional monitoring or synthetic testing. Instead of all that technical detail, we monitor the actual application from the user perspective. And in this simple example, we are looking at the login step and how long it takes to actually log into the application. And then, following the continuous improvement approach, we can add additional operations that users will perform in the application. This way, we can alert when there's actually a problem, it's user visible, but it's not all those tiny details underneath that we would not really want to alert. One thing that helps reduce the alert noise a lot, especially in real-life situations, we might have problem conditions that we cannot fix. It's some software that is maybe out of support, maybe there's some other reason, and then it's really a good idea to put some Zabbix action that goes in and it remediates the problem. It mitigates the problem. It doesn't fix it, but it eliminates the alert. There is no need to alert to the on-call person if we automatically restarted some daemon or did some other operation that helps. And there's an article that I'd like to advertise. It's actually titled, Manual Work is a Bug. This is so awesome article. I'm envious. I'd wish I had written that one myself. It's so awesome. And it actually advocates for another principle, which is that the automation does not happen overnight. Automation is a process. It starts with documentation. If we put things in writing, somebody will write down the commands, the next person will put them in a script, and that way the automation is born. So this is an article. If you have not seen it, it's so highly recommended. It's probably one of the best articles in the monitoring area. Regarding documentation, one thing is documenting the automation steps, but also it's important for the alert recipients to know what to do. If there are 3 alerts which have clear instructions what to do, and there is one which is very fuzzy, it's just confusing, it takes a lot of time to figure out what is it even about, that one alert will probably result in more cognitive strain than those 3 alerts which had clear written instructions. And crucially, these instructions must be written down. It's not something that just passed from one person to another as some arcane knowledge. So documentation, that's a thing. Another thing that might be obvious to most of the people in the room, but we have to remind ourselves about the obvious things, is that the design of the systems that we monitor, if they are resilient, we don't have to monitor about every single thing going down. If we build a cluster, and as one server goes down, we don't care about it really at that point. We care at some point later. But right then, it's fine. We don't need to alert. There's an important part of the alert noise, of tackling the alert noise, and that is making it operationalized. We need to measure the alerts to know what is really going on and how we can approach reducing them. There is a built-in widget in Zabbix, or a view in Zabbix top 100 triggers, which is a very good first approximation. So it can show you which triggers are the most noisy in recent past. I would also suggest to explore the power of the API. And with that, we can build reports like this, where there's an on-call column which shows how many alerts we've had in the on-call period, let's say 1 week. And then all of the subsequent columns show the weeks before that. If we look at it in a view like this, it becomes easy to identify which alerts are really noisy. They're alerting every single week, once or more. And it allows us also to see which alerts maybe are newcomers to the top and which ones are making a comeback. These reports, they have another very great thing. Anybody here has ever had to provide a report to their management? A few hands, probably more people who might not want to remember that if that was not a good experience. In the IT, in the technical field, you can sometimes hear that these reports are not very useful. That is the chance to make the reports really useful. You can show what is noisy, which systems, which department maybe has to do better to maybe reduce that alert noise. Make those reports useful for yourself and for the company. Now, what happens if we don't do that? Probably this. This is just a Zabbix alert view with lots of alerts, many of them ignored for a long time, and it's not really a great outlook, actually, if we ignore the alert noise. Now, we talked about the airplane industry doing really well, but turns out they're also having their own share of problems. So a few years ago, it turns out that the Boeing pilots, they were ignoring a cockpit alarm. This alarm was informing them about reduced pressure. Reduced pressure means less oxygen. Less oxygen means pilots passing out. And in 2005, actually, an airplane crashed. 121 people died. So we might think if the healthcare industry is struggling, if the airplane industry is struggling, what hope do we even have? It's just hopeless, right? What is that? Any guesses? Besides being an illustration from 1687? This is illustrating a fable by Aesop, who was a slave and storyteller in ancient Greece more than 2,500 years ago. And you probably are familiar with this because it's, I think, in most of the cultures. This is Boy Who Cried Wolf. And that is an alerting solution, which is alerting all the time. It will be like that boy who just becomes ignored, and then we can make an analogy with servers being the sheep and dying, but that's maybe stretching it a bit too far. So to conclude the areas that we discussed today, we figured out that alerts are bad because the alert noise results in the alert fatigue, which is scientifically shown to be really, really detrimental, and it can be pretty much expensive to the companies as well. We looked at the technical means that are available in and around Zabbix to mitigate this problem somewhat, or sometimes even fix it. And we looked at the cultural problems that we can either try to overcome, or the cultural solutions that we can apply to reduce the alert noise. If we look at the technical and cultural columns, at least I would say that the technical ones, they can be a challenge, but the cultural ones are what really is increasing the threshold for overcoming this problem. And to quote another classic movie, Soylent Green, it's people. Alert noise, it's much less a technical problem, and it's much more a cultural, a people problem. And that is more difficult to resolve with just one feature in the solution, or one particular feature that's maybe already available. Thank you so much. And if you have any stories or feedback, then your feedback is appreciated in this forum.
No questions? No questions then? Okay.
And there's one more quote still from a scientific study, which I cannot show anymore, but that's no problem.
Okay, no, if you want to show, no problem.
Yeah, so
Okay, I thought you
I intended to conclude with this quote, which is from another study, that the noise, it results in the reduction of trust in the monitoring solutions. If we cannot trust our monitoring solution, then it really becomes useless. So let's keep our monitoring solutions useful.